Just like ISO shutter speed, then aperture is very important for the new photographer to learn and understand. So what is aperture? Quite frankly, aperture is the size of the hole inside the lens that attaches to your camera. Now, it's very important that you understand aperture because aperture allows light to pass through your lens and strike your camera's sensor. Now, a wide aperture allows more light to pass through the lens into the camera sensor. A narrow aperture allows less light to pass through the lens and strike your camera's sensor. Now, just like ISO and shutter speed, aperture too works with the stop system. So this means that you can allow in one stop's worth more of light via your aperture, or you can allow in one stop's less light with aperture. If you wanted to, you could allow in 2 stops more worth of light with aperture, or you could let in 2 stops less worth of light with aperture. So again, you understand that aperture, just like shutter speed and ISO, works with the stop system. Now, there's a thing called F numbers with regard to aperture. So that means that every size of the hole has got a thing called an F number. For example, a wide aperture such as f1.4 looks like this. Okay, and a narrow aperture of f11 looks like this. Now, this is the hardest bit to understand with regards to aperture. Have a look at f11. Notice it's a big number, but the hole is small. And now let's have a look at f1.4. Notice that the hole is big, but the number is small. When working with F numbers in photography, i.e. aperture numbers, you have to remember that a large number represents a small hole and a small number represents a big hole. I know it's hard to understand, but trust me, once you start to understand it and you accept it, life as a photographer becomes so much easier. Now, moving on, aperture being used as an artistic effect. We always use aperture with regard to an artistic effect. That's why aperture is so important in photography, because aperture gives us a thing called depth of field. So what is depth of field? Depth of field is quite frankly the zone of focus. So let me give you an example of depth of field in action. So if we have a look at this photograph here, we can see we have got a thing called a shallow depth of field. So this means that this photograph was taken on a wide aperture, because wide apertures give us shallow depths of field, like we see in the photograph here. However, this photograph, even though it is exactly the same, we shot on a narrow aperture, because a narrow aperture gives us a lot more extended depth of field within our photographs. So as you can understand by now, a narrow aperture gives you an extended depth of field, and a wide aperture gives you a shallow depth of field. Some people normally refer to a shallow depth of field as being bokeh, but I just call it the depth of field. Now, a key note what you need to know about aperture is that a wide aperture basically helps to isolate a subject from its background, and a narrow aperture helps to include the background into the actual photograph of your subject itself. For example, if you're a landscape photographer, then you're going to be using a narrow aperture in order to get very sharp depth of field within your photographs. If you're like if you're being a portrait photographer, then you would want to isolate your subject from the background, which is where you would use a wide aperture in order to give that shallow depth of field. So there you go, guys. There's a better understanding of what aperture is in photography.